Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar, which is one of a series that the Asia Pacific Financial Wellness Initiative is hosting during Financial Inclusion Week. This is a really special week for anyone who works in this space, and I'm delighted today to have a fantastic, intimate fireside chat. But before I go any further, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm coming to you today from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. So the Asia Pacific Financial Wellness Initiative is a tiny group of volunteers who are absolutely passionate about financial wellness. And today we have the wonderful Anna Pereira Shaw, who is from the RFI Global Group, and Lebo, who is going to talk to us about inclusive finance and inclusive digital financial services. So without any further ado, over to you, Anna and Lebo.
Thanks very much, Benita. I'm really excited about this conversation today to really talk about the role of digital in particular. And our guest, Lebo, is really an expert in this space and has a lot of experience in developing digital payment solutions, financial inclusion strategies, and doing this in different markets, particularly I'm coming from Australia, where it's a different landscape. So I'm really looking forward to hearing about the different experiences in markets that are quite different and having different challenges and seeing different solutions really gain traction. So I'll hand over to you, Lebo, to introduce yourself. And if you can let our audience know a bit about yourself, your background, and what drives your passion for financial inclusion as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thanks for that wonderful introduction. So my name is Lebo Mokgabudi, as has been said. I come from South Africa, so I'm in Johannesburg, South Africa at the moment. I'm a digital financial services expert, having worked in Africa and some Asian markets, commercializing mobile money solutions and digital financial services to enable financial access to financial services, and specifically affordable, relevant services for the unbanked or underbanked in emerging markets. So I've done this work in East Africa, West Africa, some Southern African markets, as well as markets such as Pakistan, Nepal, and Malaysia. And this was through, I've worked with organizations such as Fundamo, Visa, Gemalto, and currently consulting with the International Finance Corporation as a digital financial services consultant.
Great. And what do you think drove your passion for financial inclusion, or what kind of got you working in that space?
I guess my career started in financial services, consulting, and then financial services, right? So I worked for a bank, and that was almost the first 5 years of my career, developing training my career. And I started thinking that it's all well and good to get experience and get exposure, right? But really what drives me as a person is making an impact in other people's lives. So making an impact in other people's lives, my community, and the rest of the world. And I started thinking, how can I apply my knowledge, my experience, my expertise that I'm learning in banking to make an impact in other people's lives, right? So I started just asking myself that question. And then also asking myself, questions about what is my purpose? What is my mission in life? Going through that phase. And it then came together when an opportunity presented itself at Fundamo, which enabled me to get into the industry of mobile money, right? Another thing I think that drove that was really passionate about the rest of the continent, Africa, and wanting to get an understanding of what happens on the ground and how to really do something that truly develops the rest of the continent. And I think bringing together financial services, technology, right, and then the continent drove this work in digital financial services in the rest of the continent.
Yeah, I think that's.
And if we get to research, I guess research became, mobile technology and the prolific. Everybody has access to a mobile phone, right? Generally, and then you can really access so many people through their mobile phone and use that to help build their lives and develop their lives.
Absolutely, and I guess it's proven in quite a short period of time to be something that has. Can make such a profound difference on inclusivity and the accessibility of services that typically weren't available to people. And that, your backstory of starting in banking and using those skills to make impact is, I think, what what can really drive impact, having that experience, but thinking, how can I make a difference, and what can I do to actually use these skills in a space that can make meaning for both yourself, but also the community that you're looking to help support. And I'd love to know a little bit more about your experience leading global initiatives, including the development of digital payment solutions and financial inclusion strategies. What are some of the highlights that you've had so far with your experience doing this?
Wow, highlights. I mean, in a 15-year career. So I guess some of the highlights is really getting on the ground and speaking to traders, informal traders on the ground in Nepal, in Nigeria, in Malawi, and really understanding, their business, how do they do their business, but more importantly, what problems do they have and how can technology help them to solve their problems, right? But a key insight was that sometimes when we come from the urban environment or the commercial space, we tend to think, oh, we are bringing something to them. But as you go into their businesses, you learn they actually understand their businesses more than you do. They understand how to drive their business. And even if it's manual, it doesn't mean it's broken, right? It's just about how can technology help them improve efficiencies and really help them grow their business, not fix it. So that was an insight that they really do understand their businesses. And that's one. Number two, traders, cross-border trade. There are women who are running businesses in the borderlands, right? In Zambia, in Botswana, in South Africa, in Lesotho, and they're really doing a lot of cross-border trade. And these are women who have taken, so many Africans to fantastic schools and fantastic universities globally, right? So that trade that we view as a small business or informal trade is really, the business engine of the continent and doing really well. And the amount of cash that they actually transact is quite a lot, right? Just because, again, it's not digital, it doesn't have systems, systems can help them grow, right? So that was an insight. But in that, also realizing that, growth does require technology, right? For them to access capital to really grow their businesses, they need to have technology that really helps them identify their cash flow, helps them have a digital identity, number one, because we call this the shadow economy, because nobody really knows how much money they're trading, what they're doing, but they need technology to help them develop a digital identity and specifically develop a digital financial identity. The reason you and I can access credit is because we have some sort of digital financial identity that has exposed our financial behavior and deems us trustworthy to be able to afford credit and pay it back. So really, we need digital financial solutions that help informal traders, women in business, develop that digital financial identity. That's another highlight. Another interesting finding in the work that I've done is that as much as people have a mobile phone, but in some countries, a smartphone, even in South Africa specifically, people even have access to a smartphone, but they don't necessarily use it as a smartphone, right? So they use it to communicate, and that's about it. Right. So the minute you put digital financial services on the phone, as practitioners in the space, it's not to assume that people will just use it and see the value of it, but it's really starting to understand what is their behavior, what does their ecosystem look like, and by that I mean things like, for instance, sometimes old people, it's their children who actually will help them use their phone. It's their children who translate the message, the SMS, whatever it is, right? So keeping that in mind, that's one. Another thing to keep in mind is the ecosystem that the unbanked find themselves in. Do they have access to data? Do they have access to electricity to use the service? Do they have access to affordable data? And when it comes to digital financial services, it's really the ecosystem that either can translate the cash to the digital and vice versa, right? You need a way. Yes, we want a cashless economy, but it doesn't just become cashless instantly. It's a phase. It's a phase. You need a phased approach, right? And that phased approach is that you need to still enable an ecosystem, whether it's an agent network, some sort of distribution network that enables people to transfer the digital money into cash, right? That breeds trust. And if you don't have an acceptance landscape that actually accepts digital payments, it also doesn't work, right? If the acceptance landscape is still all cash, people will just get access, will just get the digital money and then take it out in cash and then still use cash. So we really also need to think about the entire ecosystem, the merchant landscape, the infrastructure, and that's the data, and digitize all services. Only then can things become a digital ecosystem. And then lastly, I'll say, it has to really be about improving the person's life. You know, digital for the sake of digital doesn't matter, right? So really, as practitioners, again, you know, thinking about how we're improving the person's life. Are we increasing affordability to financial services, affordable financial services? And then also thinking about what financial services do they need? Right? You and me get our salary, and what we may need is payments for services, e-commerce, you know, credit. But what does a smallholder farmer need? You know, have we thought about their income behavior? They get crops, their crop cycle is very different from ours, right? What type of service do they need? A domestic worker, a security guard, what financial services do they need, right? And that's when we will actually make a difference. You know, insurance services for them, right? You're really taking into account their financial services ecosystem and developing products that they need.
Yeah, so many great points there. I like your point about growing businesses rather than thinking there's a problem that needs to be fixed, and then thinking about the role of technology to actually enable that growth. And you know, digital for the sake of digital is another great point, just when thinking about trying to change something when the system's working, and there has to be an identified need. And I can imagine it's quite challenging, but you know, the more you're on the ground having these conversations and understanding the needs of different people, then you can think about the solution and designing that to make sure it's actually going to help them, rather than it be something that maybe they install on their phone and they continue to not use it because they haven't identified how that could help them. On that point, what needs to be done to help or how do you help people engage with digital services that have been provided? Or is it really just about identifying the needs and then designing solutions that meet their specific needs?
Yeah, ultimately, I mean, even think about you and I, or any new service and any new product. Why do you use it, right? It has to solve a problem that you actually have. If something is not solving your problem, then, you know, it's just a nice to have. And maybe I shouldn't have started about you and I, because sometimes you and I use services just because they're trendy, because they're new, because we have disposable income, right? But ultimately, let's think about the market that we're talking about, the unbanked or underbanked or underserved. You know, disposable income, they don't have disposable income to waste money, to try something out and, you know, have it not work, right? So ultimately, it's first of all understanding what problem do they, what is the customer problem, you know, do they have? And then how can we develop a solution to solve that problem, right? And people will take up something if it solves their problem, right? But also taking into account, again, affordability. It has to be affordable. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And the point about disposable income is always a good reminder, just when thinking about different communities, and, you know, not being able to afford a solution that doesn't work is, you know, it's a point that the risk, there just can't be risk. It can't be something that just didn't work and they lost money on it because it's just too tight. So I could see how critical that would be, that the solution really specifically meets the need. For context, for people who aren't as familiar with the financial services landscape in Africa, what can you tell us about, you know, the level of financial inclusion and the strategies in the last 5, 10, 15 years that have been particularly effective? Maybe thinking as well about the role of mobile technology. Big question, probably.
Yeah, that's I'm going to answer it differently, rather than what's been effective. But I'll say, from an industry point of view, what I'm liking is that it's no longer just about creating access to financial services. I think as an industry for the longest time, It started with how can we create access to financial services, and we all used to talk about access to wallets and accounts, right? And we used to measure, or we still do, I guess, measure financial inclusion by access to accounts or access to wallets. And that doesn't really create inclusion. That's just access to a store of value. And I think what I've liked is that what's moved, the industry has moved to discussing financial wellness, to discussing financial resilience, and how are these financial services actually improving a person's life, right? Are we enabling them to access services or to access products that they need? And I think, you know, that COVID created an impetus for that, right? Or the pandemic the COVID pandemic created an impetus for really unearthing that financial inclusion is just not access to an account, but really access to help you build your life and grow your life. And I think that's what I like. As an industry, it's moved from just access to financial services to financial wellness and financial resilience.
Yeah, it's something that Vanita has spoken about a fair bit as well, that transition from accessibility to well-being and resilience, with resilience being quite key to, you know, how it can actually support you in your day-to-day life, and, you know, be able to handle financial stress a little bit better, and be able to face the challenges that money that relates to money and comes up. And you mentioned the pandemic, and I was interested to find out if that did identify or expose any barriers to financial resilience, or if it kind of did it make an impact in terms of speeding up any processes or delaying any impact in this space, do you think?
I think that what was exciting in the pandemic is how you saw collaboration between different bodies, between government even and technology providers. You know, one case study is, you know, in Kenya, Safaricom reduced their cost structure, right? They actually zero-rated their fee structure, I think, in order to enable people to use mobile money more during the pandemic, right? And that was a safe way to transact, I guess. Another example in Togo, also, the government collaborated with mobile money providers in Togo to leverage technology to disperse social grants through mobile money, right? I think the pandemic exposed government services a lot, where they had to think about how can we still disperse our funds and enable people to get access to funding, but not using cash, right? How can we leverage technology? You know, they started even thinking, even for instance, COVID relief funds, right? A lot of governments were giving COVID relief funds to small businesses, and they had to start thinking about how can we use a platform to disperse these funds to people. So you started seeing collaboration between, you know, the development funding institutions or government funding institutions and technology providers and fintechs to disperse those funds through their platforms. So I think that's been a fantastic an opportunity in a way for more collaboration between technology providers and government institutions. That's what's happened through the pandemic.
Absolutely. And I was going to ask you about collaboration, but I think you've already covered that point with thinking, especially about the government, you know, providing more accessible support services. Has there been a decline in cash being used in the last few years because of the pandemic, or is it kind of similar to levels that it was prior to the pandemic?
So I don't have the numbers offhand, unfortunately, the stats offhand. Most likely there was, I mean, if I looked at the township economy at the time during the pandemic, I was looking at the township economy, right? There was an increase of digital services and less use of cash, but only during lockdown. And that was only because people couldn't travel or couldn't, you know, move around. So yes, there was definitely also an increase of digital payment services. So for instance, QR codes, people using QR codes to pay increased, right? There was an increase of e-commerce, people shopping online, right? Because just the nature of being stuck at home, right? We all then used, you know, what tools that we had access to. So from an urban economy point of view, people shopped more online. But actually, I think even, you know, if I look at other markets in the rest of the continent, there was an increase in commerce, right? So people definitely shopped more online in Nigeria, in Kenya, and you've seen it also, there's been an increase in fintechs that embed solutions in logistics. So there's definitely been an increase of that. You're seeing now more fintechs accessing funding who provide services or provide delivery of services and delivery of goods. So that is also indicative of more of an increase of digital payments through the pandemic.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, especially just given how people were able to pay and the ways that making payments just had to change in a short period of time. You mentioned fintech a little bit earlier, and I was curious if there was any standout fintech initiative or strategy that you think has been particularly effective. Is there any that come to mind that you think really lead in this space?
Lead in which space specifically?
In kind of the financial inclusion or that next level of supporting financial well-being.
I think what we're starting to see is a rise in the gig economy, fintechs for the gig economy. So enabling plumbers to get paid, right? Gig workers to get paid digitally, and then that gives them a digital financial identity, which will then enable them to get access to other financial services, right? So there are companies like that. There's also a company called Gigimile, headquartered in Ghana, but they operate in Nigeria, and essentially what they do is provide a service for gig workers, drivers, right? Scooter drivers who deliver products and services for the likes of Jumia. They enable them to get financing for the scooter, right, through a digital platform. So that driver can now get access to finance their scooter and pay back their premium as they get paid by Jumia, as an example, right? So you're seeing a rise of those type of services. And the more you create a platform around them, on top of that, you can then layer on either financial services. So that's quite an exciting trend that I'm starting to see. Another trend that I'm starting to see in the fintech industry is buy now, pay later solutions, right? There's a lot of those globally, but I'll speak to some in South Africa. We're seeing a lot more, buy now, pay later solutions, but also more importantly, from financial inclusion perspective, we're starting to see a lot of alternative data being used for lending. Right. So beyond the typical financial behavior or payment behavior, but really looking at your mobile transaction behavior and other services that you use as alternative data to then develop a credit score for you to get access to loans.
Yeah, that's a great initiative and something that I think we're seeing that in other markets as well, with different forms of income coming in where the customers are unable to work in industries they previously did, or they're looking to supplement income with other forms of income, such as doing these types of delivery driving services, and some people just really struggling to get credit in the traditional methods. So other ways to form that credit score sound really forward thinking, and something that can make a massive difference to someone being able to then get the access to the credit products that help them meet their needs. And then I guess to look forward to the future, is there anything that you're either particularly looking forward to with your career in the next few years, or any kind of predictions you have things you're thinking that might happen that could be really exciting in this space, the kind of financial wellness, financial inclusion space?
I think what I'd love to see more of or participate in is services for women, right? So we talk about financial inclusion for women, and that's not just about access, enabling a woman to get access to financial services. I think it's deeper than that. I think it's understanding, are there differences in the financial service behavior of a woman, number one, and then if they are, right, for instance, taking security into account, right, in some of underserved markets, you have to take into account the security of a woman. You have to take for instance, when they trade and they hold a lot of cash, right? How can you make it easier for them and more secure for them to use financial services? But also, do they own their phone? You know, who owns the phone in the house? Taking that into account, right? If, for instance, there's one phone in the house and it's owned by the husband, so just creating a financial services product that they have access to, but the husband also has access to, you know, do we think about their dynamic in the home, right? So I'm going a bit further, that we just need to think more carefully, more intentionally when it comes to financial services for women. That's one that I'd love to see more of that. But also, as women, let's also start developing more products and solutions, right? Because, you know, potentially we could understand how to do that. So that's something I'd love to see. Another thing that I think things are moving that direction, but what I'm excited about for the future is micro investments, right? So the world of wealth tech is starting to grow in the fintech industry, but let's also enable financial inclusion, financial wellness from an investment perspective. So how can we have platforms that enable micro investments and really help the underserved also invest in their future? Right, so either getting access to stock potentially, you know, or some sort of investments, and really investing in their own wealth as well, right? And that takes into account seeing wealth differently, right? So agriculture, cows are a source of wealth. How can you leverage that sort of behavior when it comes to investments? And then lastly, I'll close with retirement, right? And really saving for the future from that perspective, or saving for retirement. How can we create more micro pension platforms, right? We have access to pensions through employment or retirement funding solutions, but how can we enable more retirement funding solutions for the underserved too, right? So micro payments towards their pensions potentially.
All of that sounds really exciting, and I think there's a real need for all of these to be covered, and I think it reflects the need to understand the people that need the support and understand the needs of different communities, but also that focus on women in particular, you know, thinking beyond assuming everyone has their own phone and thinking about how can you make investments more accessible for everyone, so, you know, help them build intergenerational wealth and, you know, secure funds for their family or for their kids, and, you know, thinking about that next level, and with the retirement as well, you know, making that something that can be for everyone, having funds when they're unable to work, especially if they're doing labor. There'd be a point in their life where it would be difficult to do the work they used to do, but having the pension in place could really be quite a huge support to them. So all of these sound really exciting, and really, you know, I'm looking forward to seeing how this progresses, and I'm sure there'll be some more amazing work that you'll be doing in, you know, maybe a lot of these spaces, which is great to see. So thanks for your time. I'll hand back to Vanita for some closing thoughts, but it's been a great discussion, and I've really enjoyed speaking with you.
Thank you, Anna.
Very
Yes, and thank you, Lebo. I've just been so excited listening to everything that you're saying. It's almost like you're reading out my entire research that I've done so far over the last few years, you know, looking at the ecosystem, making sure that products and services actually meet the needs of different kinds of consumers, thinking about things which are useful and help them to solve a problem rather than just being available because it's there. It's like the story of me looking at my new watch and going, I just wanted to tell the time, but what it's doing is telling me how many steps I've taken and, you know, a whole lot of other additional information, which is not really useful. And this is me, so we can imagine what it's like for a person from a disadvantaged background who's just trying to find their way. I'm also so excited about all of your comments that you've made about credit and the importance of looking at alternative data for those who are credit invisible and don't have a history of repayments, and how that can be used. This is growing in the Australian market. We're still very much reliant on banking, data, probably because 99% of us are banked, Lebo. So, we are a privileged country to the extent that everyone has access to a banked account. But is that access actually safe? Is it affordable? And is it in the interest of the consumer? That is the focus of a lot of financial inclusion work that we do in this country. And last but not least, I love your comments about gendered financial inclusion. What's good for the male is not necessarily good for the female, even in the same house. And we have found all of the research points to very different behavior for women entrepreneurs when compared to the mainstream entrepreneurial supports. So even in a high income, high developed country like Australia, what we're really trying to now to get the government to recognize is the need for gender specific supports for women, not gender blind, because the one size does not fit all. So I'm just so excited to hear about the ways in which you're looking at financial inclusion. I'd love to catch up afterwards, because we have had some success in the country in designing micro insurance, micro savings buffers, etc., which I'd love to be able to exchange with you. That's what the Financial Wellness Initiative is all about leveraging the strengths and the research that all of us do so that we can share our knowledge. But I'd wind up by saying this has been such a fantastic opportunity. Thank you so much to both Anna and to Lebo, and I look forward to building on this budding relationship.
Thank you so much. I've also thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you very much for having me, and look forward to further engaging with you too.